correctly with the correct amount.
D20 Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
Welcome to Me and Steve Talk RPGs, a podcast where me and my friend Steve try and help you get the most out of your role-playing game experience. Hey folks, welcome back to Me and Steve Talk RPGs. I'm Steve.
And I'm Steve.
Hey, it's two Steves.
Right?
And you know what we might do? We might talk about RPGs.
Yeah.
But before we get into whatever sort of rambly, nonsensical discussion that we tend to do, I want to take a minute to tell you about another podcast here on the D20 Radio Network, that being The Story Told. Now, The Story Told is, well, they describe themselves as kind of an RPG variety show. A lot of stuff about independent games, a lot of some game reviews. Their most recent episode, as the time we're recording, is actually an interview with a playwright. Talking about a play that he's written and parallels between gaming and theater. So you can check that out if you want. Again, that's called The Story Told. We'll put a link in the show notes, but you should be able to find them if you search them on any podcatcher that you like or use, or, heck, I don't know, if you can look them up on your smart fridge, maybe they're there. I don't know why anyone would want to listen to a podcast on a refrigerator, but, hey.
Sounds pretty cool to me.
I mean, the concept is cool, but, really? I mean, suppose if you were cooking, but then could you just put your phone on in the kitchen?
Yeah, but if you have a smart fridge that can play podcasts, why would you not play podcasts on your smart fridge?
Well, okay, I am a person who doesn't want a smart fridge, so,
Right,
that.
exactly.
But anyway.
You and me both are in the same boat, but if I had one and I could play my podcast on it, I sure as heck would play it from my house and check out my new fridge. Oh, by the way, here's my podcast.
Fair enough. So I had a thought rambling around my brain recently, and I mentioned it a couple times on a couple of recent episodes, and I wondered, kind of been wondering out loud, do we sometimes take the lore in our games more seriously than we need to, or should, or something like that? And kind of what's brought this on in some ways was some of it was a conversation I had with Luca, who wrote Ultraviolet Grasslands. And he said, one of the approaches he sometimes takes is, and Ultraviolet Grasslands is its own kind of thing, but, sometimes you just let the players define the lore as they go, or someone asks a question about the elves and you look at the player who's playing an elf and go, well, you tell us.
Yeah, tell me about your people.
And, another thing that brought this on was I've recently started playing some Earth Dawn. And Earth Dawn, not uniquely, but notably, all of the lore of the worlds is actually written from an in-game perspective and doesn't expressly have a reliable narrator. This is the recording from, this city's perspective or these people's perspective or all this. And even to the point that their maps actually aren't consistent intentionally because mapping technology was not in those eras was not of the like you didn't have satellite imaging and
yeah, it's not consistent,
but it's done intentionally.
Yeah, I mean that's cool. I always liked stuff like that. I always like when the game is like, yeah, here's a bit of I don't know how to put it, obscuring information done in the sense in the form of lore. So like you with Earth Dawn with the maps, I love that. I love that, yeah, I'm absolutely on board with letting my players build the world. I will look at my players and be like, well, tell me what this room looks like.
Yeah.
You walked into the throne room of the queen. What's it look like? Tell me what's in here.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I mean, in our Oblivion War game, Ben did that a lot with us. Some of it happened, like you'll hear it in the recordings. There were also a couple of times where few people just got together and hashed out some stuff, but it didn't get recorded, and stuff like that. And I mean, I think in that case, it really did provide some ownership and some uniqueness to the world. But I think too, And I wonder if this isn't a part of, I don't know if you call it nerd culture, or just the way most of us tend to think. We like to know these stupid little facts that no one else knows, and we like to have these one-upsmanship contests. And I wonder if sometimes we don't take that kind of too far in the context of actually playing a game. Because and just to, follow this down the hole that I'm going on, right? Like, how much of our real world history has different accounts based on whose version of it you're reading, and who knows if any of it is what really happened. So why can't your game world be the same way? I mean, even if you're playing in Star Wars or the Forgotten Realms, and yes, there's quote unquote canon, but that canon isn't necessarily going to be known to that entire universe. And so if it's not right, that doesn't necessarily mean anything, I don't think.
Yeah, I think the idea and that you're driving at is really at its core like a really good idea. And it's sort of out of that a lot of things are born. You get a lot of political intrigue out of that type of thing where, oh well, we remember this series of events happening in at this way,
Mhm.
and another group remembers a series of events happening in another way that is beneficial to them, and a third group remembers the series of events happening in a completely third opposite way.
Mhm.
And now you have to suss out what the truth is,
Mhm.
and you'll never know the truth. You'll never
Well,
know the truth.
I mean, are we actually talking about Clue?
Pretty much exactly. At
I
the end of
mean,
the day, yeah,
and I'm
that's
not saying that to make light of it, but I mean, what's the saying about, in law enforcement, whatever, about eyewitness reports not always being accurate? You talk to 10 different eyewitnesses and get 10 different accounts.
right, exactly.
I mean, and yet they all saw the same thing,
It doesn't
hypothetically
matter.
anyway.
It doesn't matter.
I mean, I just, like, I wonder, do we as GMs and as players and as just nerdy people in general stress out a little bit too much about this? And I know, look, I can say for myself as a GM that I worry about certain things sometimes, and I know I can fixate on minor details that are really of no consequence, but you know, they take up this huge corner of my brain and crowd other things out.
Hmm.
And I mean, I think too, though, I mean, yes, you do have to have some consistency, but I mean, I think even if you're running in the same world, like you always run Eberron, we'll say.
Yeah.
What's to say that the world, it's the same in every game you ever run? If that's the way you want to do it, fine. But like, I would like to think I would be able to not stress out about it.
Yeah. I know that, like, it's hard not to stress. The biggest thing is I think one of the big things with not stressing about a setting like that is setting expectations with your players. Being like, yes, this is Eberron and this is the world that, but it's, and explain the difference and why it's different now. Or, you're in a different part of this country or this world,
Or
right? You're in, or
did
go ahead.
you
What were you
Well,
gonna
no,
say?
I was just thinking when you were talking about that, like, I remember the one Ever Run game we played that you ran, you kind of implied that, contrary to quote unquote canon, whatever, that the Warforged, if I remember right, you ran that the Warforged becoming sentient kind of coincided with the morning,
Mhm. I
which
did.
is not in the original Keith Baker written Eberron, but is an interesting spin to put on that world.
Well, and in my mind, it gives the Warforged an interesting um thing about them, right? Not that they're not interesting in that they're sentient, but in that there's this great cataclysm, and all of a sudden the robots have sentience now, right?
Yeah,
Like, uh,
yeah.
a nuke went off, and now the robots are walking and talking to us
Mhm.
and talking back to us. And like, what does that mean for a world?
Yeah, and so, I mean, you take it to a point like you did there where so you take a little bit of, we'll call it published canon and tweak it a bit to make an interesting thing for people to think about.
This is why I can't run pre-written with you. I can't run pre-written modules because I always want to change and make it my own. And I end up getting like halfway through pre-written modules and end up going, well, but I don't care about the rest of this story. I want to tell my own story. And I end up telling my own story. And we don't even
Mhm,
finish the book that we started.
mhm. Well,
But
like
I use all that for like springboard stuff. And that's why it just doesn't work for me because it's like, oh well, this is just springboard material for me. But that's just how my brain works.
but you can do that, and sometimes that works to great effect, right? Like, okay, now you've played, and I've run it for a few different people, and I generally run it similarly. The Last Things Last for Delta Green, which is the quick start
Hmm.
adventure. So you've played it with me, I think just once. I know I've run it
Yeah,
multiple times. The whole conspiracy board thing in the beginning part of that is not in the book.
right.
I stole it from somebody, but
Yeah, and I know when you ran it for us, you ended it in a different place than the book is too.
kind of, yeah.
Yeah,
Now technically the final scene is supposed to happen at a cabin, and I ran it at like a trailer hunting camp. To me, that's the same
right.
thing.
It is and it isn't.
I mean,
Thematically, yeah.
I felt like I could make some of the elements, make some of the clues maybe a little more obvious that way, but also because of where I put it, that type of thing. I mean, if you were to drive through that area, you would see
Hmm.
trailer hunting camps. So, but like, yeah, I wonder, like I said, I think do we work ourselves into a tizzy over stuff that we don't need to, and could we have more fun if we just kind of accepted that, heck, even within the party, maybe, Bob the dwarf and uh, Sue the elf have two completely different views of a certain event in history, and we don't actually know which or either of them are right.
Exactly. Yeah, no, and it's an interesting wrinkle and it's an interesting thing to add to your games. But I do agree with you at the core of it is you got to let some of your lore go. You get too wrapped up in that, and it just draws. I don't know. I mean, every table's different, and you can do what makes your table happy. But what I've found is for my table is it has to be more collaborative storytelling and less I'm going to tell you a story and you're going to act out parts in it.
I think that works better. I mean, if you just want, like, okay, I had an experience where I played a quick start adventure, and I feel like person who GM'd it did not have a lot of GMing experience, and some of the gaming experience that they did have, I felt like showed through a lot. And to me, it felt very almost like what you're saying there, where like, oh, here, now you play this part now. You know what I
Right.
mean? And it felt like they were very thrown off when we did anything outside the script, so to speak. And, I mean, I can relate to that. I remember the first adventure I ever ran, I had a player do and I just was like, I don't know what to do because I didn't think about them doing that," and, you know and so maybe this is something that, as I get older and I just, I don't wanna spend the time to memorize bunches of fiddly little facts that, I could spend the time doing mundane chores around the house instead of, not that I want to do that over gaming, but I need to get those things done, right,
Well, and I'll tell this story. When I was first starting out in gaming, I thought it was imperative that I read all of the books cover to cover. So I started out, and the first game I was going to really run was going to be second edition D&D. And I'd read the player handbook cover to cover. I was halfway through the Dungeon Master's Guide when I got hung up on a point and started thinking to myself, I don't need to know all of this. I just need to know that it exists. Um, so I'll tell you the point that I got to that. It was the first lesson I learned in like role playing games. So I got to this point in the Dungeon Master's Guide that breaks down how different gems react to various things. So, like Amethyst, if you possess Amethyst, will not let you get drunk in Forgotten Realms in Dungeons and Dragons in second edition or AD&D.
Mhm.
Okay, why do I need that? Why did I sat there, I memorized this whole list. I don't still have it memorized, but I sat there and memorized this whole list thinking I was going to need it someday because my players might have an amethyst gem on them and try to get drunk. Like and I got hung up on it.
No, no, I get what you're saying. I think the where you use something like that, to me, that's the type of thing you stumble across one day while you're flipping through the book and go, "Oh,
Yeah, no,
okay."
it's a silly thing that's in there, and you sort of catalog it later and be like, "This is a silly thing that's in here," but I didn't understand that as a early GM, and I thought it was, like, required reading, that I know how all the gems interact with various things, and, yeah, it's neat. You could tie it into a gameplay thing, but, yeah, I think that's one of those at some point, you do end up learning that, there's only so much lore that's actually gonna matter.
Well, but okay. So here's to play off of that. So my thought when you started telling that was, where that would be fun to use is if they're trying to get someone drunk to talk to them,
Mhm.
and that individual is wearing a ring or has a pin on their cloak or some sort of brooch or a necklace,
Right.
and so it's not working and they're like, what the heck is going on, right? But is that also is that then counting on the players to know stuff that or the players or the characters, and at what point do you go, how could they possibly know that? Is that
Well,
common knowledge?
exactly.
Is it a thing where an enchanted amethyst, regardless of what the actual enchantment in it keeps like, I don't know, but you know what I'm saying? Like, is that a level of lore that's just not necessary to define in a rule book?
Probably. Probably. Considering how pedantic AD&D always was, I mean, probably. More
Well,
than likely.
that'll lead me on to another rant, and that's actually, how pedantic and certain communities, I think, are worse about it than others. We get about rules and stuff, and this is, in all honesty, one of the big turnoffs I have with a lot of the groups that I see playing, like, 5th Ed. Um
Oh, man. I'm gonna plead the 5th on any of this conversation here, man. I'm gonna let you talk.
Well,
I don't think anybody's pedantic. I'm not trying to kick no hornet's nests. I don't have no opinions on certain groups of people being really judgy. Like, nah.
well, no, and look, I'm not trying to say it that it's wrong, okay?
No, I'm
I
joking around.
but no, but, like, yeah, and honestly, where this hit me was when, Russ Morrissey dropped Level Up,
Right.
and I still am in his Discord, and the discussions that exploded in the Level Up section about, "Well, if you this and this and this and that and that and that and this, then this," and I'm just going, "Oh my gosh," like, it's a game, people, have fun with the spirit of it, don't worry about the letter, and
I I
I
so forgot about Level Up.
and they're beautiful books, they really are, but, like,
Yeah,
I I
no, I'll
I
let you
just
finish that thought and then I'll
I
share
get
mine.
so put off by, and you know me well enough to know that I will participate in these arguments because once you get that side of my brain going, I'm off to the races, and there we are, and that's what happens, So I like I kind of have to look in the mirror when I'm having this conversation, but you know, it, man,
Certain
sometimes,
groups.
well, and I think there are elements certainly in well, probably all gaming communities, but
Well, yeah, there's I exist in a lot of gaming communities, and I can tell you that not just amongst the tabletop RPGs, but tabletop card games, video games. There's a lot of people out there that have a lot of opinions on everything. And to each their own, whatever. You want to be that way, that's fine. Yeah, I don't.
you
Nope,
don't what?
gonna just pleading the 5th on that because I don't even wanna. I don't even want to broach like, oh yeah, this is why I'm not a fan of like running games online because I don't want to hear, oh well, you didn't do this rule right. Well, I don't care. Okay, I don't care. We all had a great time. Did you hear the laugh that came out of Steve when I did that?
Well, you know what? I mean, like, I've told the story of the night Bubba went crazy. On the show, and I can tell you right now, I can message most of the players from that session, the ones I still am in contact with, and they all remember that session to this day. And we went way off the script and off the rails, and and that's not exactly the same thing, but
Yeah, no,
it's
I
the
it,
experience, not the execution of the precision.
there was a time, and that still exists to some extent. There is competitive tabletop game role playing games played. If you want to play your role playing games that way, go for it. You have fun. You want to be a competitive rules lawyer? Hey, great, good for you. I'm really glad that you exist. I'm glad that you're in the hobby. I'm glad that you found a niche that you enjoy. However, unless I'm asking, hey, what is this rule? I I I, I don't need the advice. I'm not trying to be rude, but I'm just trying to say that if I'm going and saying, "Hey, what is this rule or how does this work?" versus, "Hey, I did this cool thing," and then somebody goes, "Well, that's not how the rule works." Well, I don't care how the rule works.
Well,
Do I?
you know, I was listening literally on my drive home tonight to one of the early episodes of season 3 Carrion Company.
Oh
A-
yeah.
And for those who don't know, it's a actual play series put out by the Toa Tabletop Mud and Blood podcast, and they use Warhammer 4th Edition, which is a notoriously crunchy, complicated, involved rule set. And there are probably rules for literally damn near everything. And the individual who runs this game is very well versed in the lore of the world. And I think he's stronger on lore than the actual mechanics of 4th Ed, but he still knows them quite well. There was a situation came up where one of the players rolled a skill roll, something involving spell casting, and they got what would on a normal skill roll be a crit roll. And he just on a whim was like, okay, so here's the way this works. Because there was some debate about one of two different things happening. And he's like, well, here's the one thing happens, and the other thing you were thinking about happens, just not for all that long. And I thought
Hmm.
it was a beautiful example of, okay, you know what? Let's not bother to look this up. This makes it fits in well with our story right now. Let's just roll with it and keep going in the scene. And I think that's important to do.
Yeah, it's crazy how good that actual play is. Uh,
Yeah, and it is because I mean Sean the GM is very very good, and the players are all very good. They're very into it, but it's not like it's not your critical role at all. But
mm-mm. It's a very
it's
different game as well.
oh yeah,
It's a
and it's
very
very
interesting.
dark and
It's also very, yeah, mechanically, it's very dense.
mhm. But like I just thought that was such a great example, and I don't know if you remember the scene I'm talking about. I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but it was just a like, you know what? No, this is how we're going to do this. Everyone good with that? And everyone was like, sure.
Yeah. Yeah, 90% of my rules, that's how it goes. It's like, hey, is everybody cool with this one? All right, cool. This is how this is gonna work. Yeah, I don't know. It's like I said, teach their own.
Well, but I think, to take it back to where we started around lore, I think if you can approach, like, okay, yes, you do need or probably do want to have some history of your world, right? But at the same time, keep in mind that just because even though you as the GM theoretically know the empirical history of whatever the name of your world is, in world, especially if you're talking about a pseudo medieval fantasy setting, there's going to be many accounts of what happened and takes on it and this and that, and the history of the dwarves, what the dwarves say about the elves and what the elves say about the elves isn't going to be the same thing, and what the humans say about the elves and the dwarves is going to be a third thing.
Right.
Because that's how, I mean, we can see it in real history, like even, stuff that happened in World War II. I mean, heavens, they're constantly finding stuff that means that the accepted account of this battle, well, didn't really go that way. and that was 75 years ago.
Yeah, it wasn't even that long ago.
Yeah, especially in where we're talking sometimes in these fantasy worlds, thousands of years of history. Well, geez,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, and I think, who does that particular idea really well, to shout out a creator we like, Gav, with Warpland.
Yeah. Well, but all of his
Um,
games are kind of heavy on the make it feel like this and make your own details.
yeah, but he described it a little bit when he was on the podcast, and then it is very much like uh, the truth is out there kind of story, like obfuscation
Yeah, I think
through, like, yeah.
yeah, no, he's got kind of that I don't know what the right word is, but kind of that kind of counterculture. There's a truth out there, but no one wants to say it kind of thing going.
Yeah, very much so.
But like or just the layers of the everything, you know. This is the layer that everyone believes, but there's 4 layers underneath it.
Hmm.
I don't know. I mean, it's a thing, and then, like I said,
It's
I just
primarily, yeah.
well, yeah, but like I said, I just it's been on my mind that like, man, sometimes maybe we just ought to relax about this. And what do you want to say? Like, okay, another one. I'll story I'll tell myself here, sort of. This happened at Gamer Nation Con. I was playing in a Star Wars game. Now I won't go into the details of it all, but I was playing. Um, well, I'll go into some minor detail. We were playing Lord of the Rings in Star Wars because the theme at this past Gamer Nation Con was Lord of the Rings. So there's a group based out of that area. It's kind of a gaming club. They come there, and I don't remember. I know Nightwing is from our Discord is one of the people. But anyway, we're playing in this game, and I ended up pulling the. And I don't remember the character's given name now, but I was basically playing Sam, but as an astromech droid. So I went full psycho R2D2 chopper with Sam Gamgee because to me, like, look, we all know R2D2 is a ride or die homie, just like Sam. Astromech droids in Star Wars are psychotic little assholes, right?
To be, yeah.
So I went, I went kind of crazy with this, but like in my mind, it all fit. And so at one point, we're doing something, and there's this little starfighter there. And we're actually having a character land battle, but there's this starfighter there. And, look, I'm a Star Wars fan, but I'm not mega Star Wars lorist that a lot of people are. And they had said what model, starfighter it was. I'm like, is there an astromech socket? Because my first thought, we were getting ambushed by a squad or something, and my first thought was, psychotic little astromech droid is going to, do the boost jump thing into the socket, and then just not try to fly the damn thing, just turn it around and blast them. So I'm like, well, is there? And then they're like, oh no, that model doesn't. I'm like, okay, and it was cool, right? But at the same point, the image of the astromech droid doing the thruster boost thing to socket himself into the fighter and just turn it around and mow down this squad of stormtroopers or whatever would be a really cool cinematic scene.
Yeah, very much so. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like sometimes even in my personal games, like you get wrapped up in the whole hullabaloo of it all, and then you feel like, oh, I didn't hit this story point, or oh, I didn't tell them this bit of lore. I didn't explain this bit of lore very well. And the thing of it is that the person most invested in your story most of the time as the GM is you. The players are invested in telling their story. And if your story happens to be a good backdrop for their story, they're going to take and flourish. But if you can't mesh with what the story they would like to tell, it's gonna be a sort of a hard game for you.
Yeah.
Because if your players, like my players for my regular game, I know are not gonna be able to handle a super serious, grim, dark noir story, but I know I can get them with like a silly, goofy heist,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I can make that work.
Yeah.
But it's all about, what works
Collaboration.
for you and what works for your players.
Yeah. Yeah. And what common ground can you find? And I think most times too, if you try and find common ground, then most people will reciprocate, and so in the end, you both have a good time. And generally speaking, again, my experience with most gaming tables I've been at, when you work together, it's better than either of you's idea individually.
Yeah, you have to give a little to take a little, right? Like
Yeah.
you have to like concede a little bit of ground just for the sake of um brevity.
Well, you got to give to live, you know? I mean,
Yeah, I don't but yeah, it's one of those things, you know what I mean?
well,
But
yeah.
w-
I don't
I
know.
yeah, I think I'm running out of steam here, Steve. Uh
That's fair. It is 2:30 in the morning.
Fair enough. This past my bedtime.
I know that feeling, although I no longer say it at this hour.
I know, right? It's man, I feel like 11 o'clock hits and I'm like, oh, it's late.
Oh, wait till you get another 10, 15 years on you.
I know, I know.
Oh,
But with all that being said, I think it's time for game of the week.
woohoo! Game of the week.
Game of the week. Game of the week.
All right, what you got for me, Stevie?
I have a game called Spectral Exterminators.
Ooh, that sounds fun.
It is an all new, with an asterisk, and legally distinct role playing game experience. It is totally not Ghostbusters.
Aha! You got a link for that somewhere by any chance?
Yep. Totally not Ghostbusters.
Mm-hmm.
Totally
No,
not
absolutely not.
Ghostbusters run off of OpenD6.
Oh,
And
wow.
this is an old WEG game. Yep.
No, that actually not an old WEG game. That is the origin of that system.
Yeah. So basic gameplay, character creation, running the game, everything in this. It's pay what you want. I don't know. I think it's worth $1.
Yeah. No, and you got to play the original Ghostbusters, didn't you?
It's so fun. So fun.
Well, who wrote that?
Sandy Peterson. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I guess. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
I just took a shot in the dark.
Yep.
Oh, well, what do you got, Steve?
All right. So my latest watch it while I'm at work binge, and I'm actually into, I think I got like a handful of episodes left in the last season, has been The Unit.
Okay, I don't know the unit.
It's actually based off a book called Inside Delta Force. So I've enjoyed it. Dennis, what's his name, Haysbert,
Oh,
is
okay.
kind of one of the lead characters. Like I said, I've enjoyed it as a show, and I've
Yeah.
always kind of had a soft spot for these kind of paramilitary spec ops kind of things. Anyway, so I found a game. It's called Ghost Ops. It bills itself as a
Yeah.
modern day covert ops RPG. Now, there's a bunch of different games out there. I haven't yet read or played this, but it looks interesting. The PDF will set you back $5 for the core book, which is a 250-page book, so it's not insubstantial. There are tons and tons and tons of supplements they've put out for this. All, like actually I think there's a digital bundle where you can get all of it for like 40 some dollars.
Nice.
But
That's not
what
bad.
I'm interested in this, and like in the base book, it says you get, information on 13 different countries, over 20 spec ops units, K9 companions, rules for building, buying, and upgrading safe houses. It says it uses something called bullet time, which, if it's like the cinematic term, that could be really cool. But what I'm interested in mostly is it says it uses fudge dice at its core, but is neither fudge nor fate as far as how it works, which also sounds interesting because it sounds like a simple mechanic, but maybe not, because like fate is fun, but you have to get the group that kind of groks how it works. You know? Like if you have people that don't kind of understand how to play fate,
Yeah.
it kind of doesn't work sometimes. And so I'm
No.
wondering, I'm curious about this partially because I want to see how they took these special dice and did something else with them.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting. I think that's definitely the most well, not the most interesting thing here, but I think it's definitely a really interesting, like, turn to things.
Yeah, I mean, and for $5 for because the other thing too is like I own games that I could run that type of game in. You could do this easily in Cyberpunk, or you'd have to make some careers probably to do it with like Genesis. I could do it in Rifts or probably Savage Rifts. But the thing I like too about the unit as a show is that it doesn't just deal with like it's not the Delta Force movie in episodic TV form. It deals a lot more with the outside the mission lives of both the soldiers and their families, and how it all is sort of this weird jumbled messed up symbiote thing.
Yeah. No, that's cool.
And so like I said,
Um,
this game has my interest.
yeah, definitely. Well, is this episode gonna drop before PGX?
Yes. On
Okay.
that subject, we might skip a week due to convention because I normally get to do my editing on the weekends.
Right.
So, yeah, this would be the last episode before PGX. Um,
Um, Maybe I'll try and bring a mic and we could record something or something.
that's possible, yeah. So there may not be an episode next week, everyone, because I only have so much of me to go around, and
Right.
I intend to go have some fun gaming at PGX and possibly
That's
stop
my
by
intent.
Worm Brew as well if I can, since it's right around the corner from me.
Yeah, I might try and swing that as well. I don't know what the whole plan is, but I want to talk to you after this.
Fair enough.
Make a plan. But yeah. Well, with all that being said, check out if you hear this on Tuesday, check out PGX this Friday, Pittsburgh Monroeville Convention Center.
Mhm.
That is October 4th, 5th, and 6th
Mhm.
in the year 2024 for those of you listening in the future.
Mhm.
Um,
I believe in the future I will be running a game. I think I have a game Friday night and a game Saturday.
okay. I don't have any games. So that's going to be fun. But yeah, as always, be kind to one another and get out there and play some RPGs.
Yep. Take care, y'all.
Intro and outro music by the band 12 Noon. You can email us at meandsteverpg@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter at @andrpgs. Find us on Facebook at Me and Steve RPG Podcast. On Discord at Me and Steve RPGs. And as always, all of these links are in the show notes. Thank you, and be kind to one another.
How much for the cigar?
Cigar, $20, dog. You gotta go down the street to the store and buy that.
Do we sometimes take lore in our games more seriously? Do we some take